Are there any additional agenda items that folks would like to add to the agenda this evening?
Thank you.
We'll discuss the Milton River aspect that was not on the subsequent.
Well, I was imagining that fit under an agenda item 6.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so I do want to discuss that. I think that would be really helpful if, as part of that, you could present a little bit about that.
Sure.
Are there any other agenda items that folks want to bring up? Maybe let's take a moment and just go around the room, since Mary, you haven't been with us in person yet. It might just be helpful to have everyone's name and face to get it. So I'm Tracy.
Alex Sasha.
Michael Phil. Lisa Troy.
Mary Steptadakis.
Jack Turner.
Alfredo.
Folks on the Zoom.
Do we have any?
I'm Ron Israel.
Wonderful. So I believe the first order of business is to review and approve the meeting minutes. And the secretary's draft of the minutes from the last meeting on July 20th were sent out on August 11th. Are there any corrections to those minutes as distributed? Is there a motion to approve the minutes? I motion to approve the minutes. A second. All in favor? Aye. Wonderful. The minutes are approved. So the next item on the agenda is just a chance for us to chat a little bit about the article from Mark Dulia on climate leadership among Boston metro area communities. Arthur had shared this with me, and we shared it around with the meeting materials. And it seemed like this might be a useful article for us to consider, just because it's taking a kind of a broad look at what other towns are working on with regard to action. And you know, we can certainly learn from our neighboring communities. So does anyone have any thoughts? Or Arthur, do you want to say a little bit about what struck you about that article when you shared it?
Just mention as a bit of background that Mark, who's a former Milton resident and was a senior planner across several communities, including Cambridge, sent me a note last month with a website that he's established on climate action, and it's www.climateplanning.city. It's a pretty thorough site, and if you have a chance to get into it, you want to take a look at the buttons, because under each of them, and they are organizations, cities, emerging tech, specific actions, topics, and financing. There's a treasure trove of information. He had sent shortly after I was on the sometime in September in 21, when I was on the select board, a note with a reference to an article that he had published in Boston Magazine, and I had lost it somewhere in my filing, so I asked him if he'd resend it, and what he sent was the article that Tracy sent you, which was the unabridged version of Boston Magazine, truncated his original article, so you have what he originally submitted to them, and then taking a look at the website, you'll get an opportunity to see the vast amount of information that he's been compiling. I guess, Tracy, you were interested in seeing whether or not this is someone that the committee might want to talk with directly. Yeah, I think so. And I think we'll get into that a little bit when we talk about the work plan. But one of the things that I think we'll want to think about in this article is, and the website are just a great example
is that there are so many resources out there, people, websites, documents, just so many things that we can draw on. And, let's build, to me, it makes sense to build on the work that others have done. So one of the things that I started to do in putting together that draft work plan is to start to think about some of those resources and who might we bring in to talk with us, as well as what resources might we use as tools as we're doing research. So I think Mark is a great example, and we might want to bring him in. I'd be curious to hear what others think about that. But also, this is just kind of an example too of, there may be other resources that we find, other people that we think would make sense to bring in to talk to us at various points. And so I encourage us all to think about that as we, I imagine the work plan will be a living document. So as we continue to do that, let's bring up ideas. And I did put on the agenda for today, and I expect this will be a standing agenda item, is to have a chance for us all to announce either upcoming meetings or events of interest, but also resources that we're identifying. So, for example, if between now and next meeting you come across another website or a person that you think we should talk to or whatever, that'll be a chance to sort of share that in real time with each other, so that we can get it onto either the agenda for a future meeting or just make folks aware. So are there any thoughts about inviting Mark to come speak with us specifically?
I think it'd be great.
I think so. Yeah, it's pretty
Absolutely.
insightful. We've done work with some of the states, cities in Massachusetts. It's widespread. And funding is key, like in terms of just what kind of funding is available, where do they allocate that, and what's capital based. But to hear him kind of talk about the strategy around that, because it's going to take time. It's going to take like a 10-year plan, and depending how the funding evolves with the IRA and how we access those funds, making kind of what's prioritized for the town to make the impact. Or he might have feedback on that already, because I know, like you mentioned, Arthur, Cambridge is pretty far along. Newton is pretty far along, and some of the other kind of other cities and towns that I think have similar type of Arlington as well. They're pretty far along, similar to what Milton kind of has in terms of population and just some of the infrastructure challenges we may have.
So assuming that we might invite him to come speak with us, I'm hearing interest in sort of learning from him about communities that are similar to us, resources that they've used, funding opportunities. Are there any other questions that we want to ask him? Or any concerns?
How are we going to benchmark ourselves? I guess that would be something that we need to be able to represent. I know there was some data that in terms of looking at our scope 1 and scope 2, and just being able to benchmark that as we look at the plans, because folks will want to see what the data looks like after we do some implementation.
Yeah, you think, data identification and gathering will probably be something we have to work into the plan itself,
Agreed.
because ready-made data to track progress doesn't exist or isn't readily available for everything.
Agreed.
And just from reading his article, it sounded like the grinding legwork that he had to do to just find out even the status of climate planning in different towns was pretty extensive.
I think the metrics and how to set up a reasonable timetable so that, overly ambitious or under-realistic.
I agree.
And possibly also tap in for resources that he would share with us that we could also mine.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to reach out to him. Are we thinking that we would like to have him come sooner than later in our process? It sounds like some of these things that we're thinking we might ask him about, like time frame, for example, would be good to know maybe sooner than later. Does that make sense? See if he could maybe come to September or October meetings, something like that.
I know we're planning on discussing the budget process later in this meeting, but from what I've heard, the request and proposal is sort of due by October, which is just 2 meetings from now. So I think we should probably make a final decision on this after we sort of thought about the broad scope of what we need to do and how quickly and whether, you know, because I think our time together is fairly limited.
Mhm.
Um,
Good. Well, unless there are other comments on that, I'm gonna suggest we move on to the next agenda item. And so. There we go. There we go. So I wanted to spend the bulk of this meeting talking about our proposed work plan, with definitely leaving time to talk about the town planning and budgeting schedule, and we may go back and forth a little bit between these topics. But I think it will be helpful for us to have a kind of a broad plan for how we plan to accomplish our work over what time period, and the resources that we might want to bring in as part of that, but we'll fill in those resources as we go. What I'm hoping that we can do tonight is think a little bit about what steps should be included, what's the order of the steps, and what's a reasonable time frame, just to give us, you know, kind of a general roadmap for where we want to go. And as I mentioned in an email to everybody, we sent out 2 versions of the work plan, because we drafted one version and looked at it and thought, gosh, that's a long stretch of time. And then so we developed a condensed version, which is still a long stretch of time, but a little bit short. So the first version, which if you look at the file names in what was sent, that's the one that has ideate, prioritize, due diligence, finalized in the title. So that one is, and it says ideate and so on.
I think I might have passed it second to.
There you go. So yeah, it says ideate, prioritize down the left-hand side. So this was kind of building on the document that we had discussed last time. So it kind of took those steps that we talked about in broad strokes and broke it down into like, okay, so how exactly would we go about these steps and over what time frame? So you can see that this timeline starts in our next meeting, September, and brings us to March of 2025 as having a final plan. And it involves, you know, community outreach, it involves prioritizing, it involves doing further research and so on. So that's one option. Another option to consider is the streamlined version. And this one is the one that starts with outline on the left, followed by research and drafting, followed by community and expert engagement. So this tries to accelerate a little bit and say, okay, we know broadly what this plan needs to look like. Let's come up with an outline first. Then let's divide up the work and let's start researching and actually drafting early on, because that way we can have something then to respond to. It still involves going out to engage the community, doing a survey, having multiple public meetings. But this sort of orients towards getting a rough draft, something on paper first, and then going out to get feedback and refining. So those are 2 different approaches. There are only 2. I'm sure there's lots of other ways to approach this. So I just want to open it up and see what comments or suggestions folks have. We could pick one of these as a starting point. We could do something else entirely. These are just to kind of get the conversation going and get our heads around a possible approach.
I like the idea of having, I guess, subcommittees, you know, dividing up the research. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I did think about that a little bit, because I've heard that suggestion from some other town committees. The concern that popped up to me was, you know, because of the open meeting law.
Yeah.
The way we're currently structured, 3 of us could get together to discuss, you know, a section, and we wouldn't be violating the open meeting law. If you create a subcommittee of 3 people, then every single time they get together and meet,
Okay.
it needs to be posted. So, I mean, I think there's a balance to be struck here between doing this transparently, which is really important, but also there's just a lot of like learning and conversation that needs to happen. And with too granular a committee structure, we may be forced into doing that completely alone, which.
So you can divide and conquer, I guess, if it's not subcommittees.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could identify, you know, within this group, these are the 2 or 3 people who are interested in conservation, who are interested in transportation. And then, you know, we can, you know, certainly we wouldn't want to like strategize on things that should be deliberated in public, but just like the learning process, I feel like we could get together and
Yeah.
do that without having to do it on the meeting schedule. But if I'm off base, there's correct.
It's correctly, if I'm off base, it seems the 2 major pillars are mitigation and adaptation.
Mhm.
Would it make sense, if that is the case, to have the work focus around each of those?
Preservation, you do preservation. That should be a big part.
That kind of fits under both
And-
mitigation and adaptation.
So I would think mitigating is you've already created a problem. So now you're trying to mitigate your
Yeah.
problem, where prevention and preservation and conservation is sort of the first step, so then you don't have to mitigate.
Well, the way he defined it in the article, which is, I mean, I've heard people use mitigate in
Yeah.
other senses, but in this article, mitigation was the bringing down the greenhouse gas emissions. And, you know, conserving natural lands isn't like the biggest lever on that side, but it is important. Making sure that you're not cutting down, forest that's respirating CO2 of the atmosphere is like part of that. But then also maintain those natural lands for flood resiliency and, you know, wildfire prevention. It has a, let's say, that topic of conservation. Sits in both buckets. It might also divide it up by sort of functional areas, because there's a lot to know about electricity, and not everybody maybe wanting to go deep on that. There's a lot to know about transportation.
I'm curious, when folks think about working on this, and at this point, since we don't have a budget for a consultant, I'm imagining, and tell me if you guys are imagining differently, but I'm imagining we're actually gonna sit down and we're gonna do the research ourselves, and we're gonna actually write some stuff ourselves. And then we're gonna get help. But I'm kind of imagining that we're actually gonna be doing some of this drafting. So, so if that's the case, I'm sort of thinking about the number of topics we might need to cover. I just listed out ones that I saw in other plans. So this is on, in the streamlined version, this is under task A, outline the climate action plan. And these are definitely not fixed, but they're just examples. So we might have areas in the plan like energy, zoning and permitting, buildings, transportation, food and waste, infrastructure, conservation, and adaptation. Maybe that's not the right number, but anyway, just to give an idea, that's 8 topic areas. I think there's 9 of us on this committee. So when I think about subcommittees, I think, do I want to be on a subcommittee on multiple subcommittees, or do I want to take one topic and like say, okay, I'm going to work on X topic, and I'm really going to try to wrap my head around that a little bit and write something about that. And I'm not talking about writing a long diatribe. I'm talking about trying to consolidate what I learned into a couple of pages. That's going to be, here's the issue, here are some action items, and that's our draft that then we get feedback on. So that's sort of how I was thinking about it, but I'm really curious, like, that might be totally different than how you were thinking about your engagement in this committee, and I want to hear that if that's the case. Yes, right.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Greg, sorry. So, I don't want to get overly bureaucratic, but it does seem to me that the work plan should be framed by some sort of very simple statement of the goals of the Climate Action Committee. I mean, what are we doing? And what's the purpose of what we're doing? and what do we hope to achieve as the results. I think, if we had that, then priorities, action areas, and things like that would fall into place with a clear, maybe just one goal or two goals, but a good goal statement, I think, would help propel our work.
We do have the charge.
Yes,
So we're charged with developing a climate action plan, and it needs to include a process of public engagement.
mhm,
Yeah. So we're engaged, we're assigned to develop a climate action plan for the purpose of lowering Milton's overall emissions over a 10-year period, or why are we doing this?
Well, I think.
yeah, maybe it'd be helpful for me to read that section of the charge. It says, so the charge of the committee, we have to review town bylaws and solicit public input, but when it comes to the plan, we are supposed to prepare a climate action plan for consideration by town meeting that addresses the strategies and best practices for reducing community-wide greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 baseline levels in alignment with the target set by Massachusetts law, and goes into detail on that. So, by 75% by 50% by reduction by 2030, 75% by 2040, net zero by 2050. So it is organized around emissions reductions, which is often called mitigation. And we
Right.
previously discussed that the plan should also include adaptation. So I think that is the broad context. I agree with you that we need to have in the plan itself a clear statement of what it's trying to do. But we do at least have that starting point.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't heard that before, probably my fault, but something like that at the top would be good.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely, I agree. Rounding in what our charge is will be really helpful, because we're gonna get pulled in so many different directions over this this is just like the biggest topic ever.
Yeah.
And so I think if we keep coming back to that charge, it'll help us stay focused.
And that's ultimately what we're accountable to the select board for.
Yes. Yeah, and we'll have to report back to them. So that's one of the things in the work plan that we sent around is basically twice a year going back and reporting to them on our progress. So however we set this up, we're gonna wanna plan to do that.
Tracy, going back to your mentioning of, or Alex, you mentioned budget and funding.
Mhm.
There are really two aspects of this.
Mhm.
But to consider, one is what is it that the committee needs in the way of funding in order to do its work successfully,
Mhm.
such as the possibility of hiring a consultant to work with it, if that's the decision of the committee. Then there's the whole matter of the financing of the climate action plan for the town, and that's what town meeting would really want to have as well,
Mhm.
because they're the ones that will dispose of the monies that would support the climate action plan.
That's a great point. Yeah, and I've been
The
kind of,
warrant committee, of course, the process that has to go through.
yeah,
This is one reason why I felt like sort of speeding up the, getting to a place where we have a bunch of candidate actions kind of down on paper sooner rather than later is important, because it's a very like abstract question right now, like what might be in there that we would need town meeting funding for, like, well, I don't even know what the ballpark set of things that we might be talking about is. It's probably better to brainstorm that list and then go, oh, look, these things look expensive. Let's start exploring whether anybody's going to pay for that.
Maybe see what other towns have had success with in terms of their initial funding, what their town meetings have said are priorities for funding.
I'm thinking as I hear everyone talk about looking at these areas, the clean energy, transportation, buildings, and maybe if we could come up with you know, a few questions, 5 questions we want answered by the next meeting. Like identify 3 bylaws that, you know, in Milton that fall under this. Identify 2 or 3 things other towns are doing as advice. Maybe this website you mentioned, find one thing in that website that would be helpful. And that might kind of get us in a brainstorming mode of kind of sampling information to see, like, you know, we don't even really know what we don't know. So it's like, oh, wow, it would take me, you know, a year to read that website or something. And that might help us gauge our, you know, the time commitment and get a sense, you know, how much time it will take. And is, you know, another question. So maybe something we could do is come up, like, what are the first 3 to 5 things we want to know about each of these categories?
And maybe even, I know you at the first meeting, you sent around a list of all the towns and all of their, action, climate action, policies. So I looked through a couple of them, but I haven't really like studied them, but maybe, you know, you had said, put your name next to 1 or 2, and maybe that's what we do, is we each really pick one town and highlight what we liked about that, and then we contact that town, like, well, how much did you have to spend? You know, who did you work with? What was your timeline? So then we don't really have to reinvent the wheel entirely. And then, you know, narrow it down to maybe 3 or 4 towns. So my concern really is budgetary, because I think there's going to be an override, you know, and so unfortunately, I think with the new committee, we're not at the top of the list. So I think probably most of the work is going to fall on us, you know, probably for the first year. But there are so many people out there who have, I mean, Milton is just rich with so many smart, like really smart people. And maybe there are people who aren't on our committee, but we could all tap into and say, could you help? Certainly, you know.
This is gonna go back to something that you mentioned a little earlier about connectivity. And things not necessarily always being in isolation of one another. And that is, as we take a look at the individual towns, also take a look at what they might be doing with neighboring communities. Is there anything that's being done that connects them on a county-wide basis? Middlesex County is oftentimes one of the leading counties in terms of progressive activity in the Commonwealth. So maybe there's something there that we can take a look at as well.
I want to test an idea a little bit. I really like that idea. We should talk with other towns and we should learn about their connectivity to each other. And I'm just curious, because it seems to me we have a couple different ways of looking at this. Like, we're definitely going to need to go out and gather information, a lot of information. And one way we could do that is by town. And one way we could do that is by topic. So I'm wondering which is more a natural alignment for this committee. And so I'm curious, are there, like, Maggie, I know you've talked about conservation as being like your topic, that's your thing. Do other people have topics that they're like, this is the thing that I want to dive into, or are people more like, I want to know about everything, so maybe that would lead us more to a talent-based approach? I think both could work, but I'm just curious if folks have topic areas that they're kind of inclined to.
Probably clean energy.
Clean energy for Mary?
If you want me to do buildings, I can look at buildings. I'm sorry, Ron.
No, it's okay. I just had one, I think topics is a good way to go, but my concern is as we move forward, that we move forward in with a data-based approach, meaning that the extent to which we can establish some kind of baseline for each of the topics would be great. And I know there's been some work done on that already. It would be good to have more of that in front of us if we could.
Yeah, I think, the town has received was it 2022?
Yep, and twenty
Inventory.
seventeen, yeah, greenhouse gas inventory.
2017, and we're gonna hear more. There wasn't enough time in this session for us to get dive on that, but that will be soon. I do, my professional interest is in data, and I think this problem of getting the right data to track progress is a really interesting one. I think the baseline situation is kind of amazing that we were able to get 2022 data, right? For a while there was like the most up-to-date available was 2017, and then
Right.
it's just not updated frequently enough to really be tracking things with the cadence that we would ideally want. And that's a problem that I think that needs to be tackled kind of statewide, that we might be able to contribute something, or scrounge up useful data on the areas that we're really gonna be focusing on, you know. So I would think a data strategy would be a piece of our plan as well. It may take some time to actually cause the data we need to exist.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're gonna need a baseline, we're gonna need a source of data that's reliable that we can go back to. So that is really important, but I just want to follow up on the topic question, because I heard from Mary, I heard from Maggie. Lisa, what about you? Do you have a topic that jumps out at you?
A lot of them jump out at me. I mean, I'm representing the school committee,
Mhm.
so I feel like, buildings and transportation and food waste could all easily fall under those.
Mhm.
I know a lot of our school buildings already have solar panels, and, I can talk about the SREC market.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. I'm just curious, I want to just hear from everybody, and then we can go on to other things, but I didn't want to miss out on anybody. Arthur, did you have a topic that jumps out at you?
Fairly agnostic and willing to bend to what the committee needs, so we can fit me in whatever area you want me.
Okay, and Ron, I know you said you like the idea in general. Did you have a particular topic that jumps out at you? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm interested in forest, green space, that kind of topic.
Okay, so like conservation as well.
Yeah, conservation, yeah.
Okay.
I'm also interested in adaptation. Back when I was a teacher, I ran a whole months-long STEAM project, and we didn't say adaptation, we called it resilience. And so I've done a lot of research about that. But that's a big topic. I mean, each one of those could have a person on it.
Totally.
Yeah, and I'm not thinking that any of us is going to, if we take this approach, that we are gonna know everything about it at all. I think your point about what are a few things that we wanna know? What is the starting point? That's sort of more how I'm thinking about it, is let's get started, dip our toe in the water, and then see what we need to learn, so that then we can reach out to others and learn. And then ask for feedback, because that's gonna be a key part of this, right, is to hear from others in the town, staff, government, public citizens, just everybody, we need to get
Right.
feedback.
I'm kind of envisioning that we make a table, right? So we list all these topics, and then the other side of the table, or all the columns would be what Milton bylaws would be in there, what, like I was saying before, and then we could just all add some links to that, as a starting point.
The other side of the coin is, as we're looking at other communities, some of them have exemplary bylaws that we don't have,
True.
that we could propose.
That's a good
And that
point.
would fit mitigation and that adaptation individually or maybe simultaneously.
Great idea.
Uh-huh.
And we do have a bylaw review committee, so you can run it past that.
Of course.
Tongue in cheek, right?
Yeah.
Alex, did you have a topic? I know data is your thing, but.
I mean, I definitely, have spent more time learning about, energy in buildings. And the idea of reading the bylaws carefully fills me with dread.
Bylaws.
But again, I'm willing to, pitch in on anything. I sort of, I like your point that, generally each functional area needs somebody who's sort of primarily driving it, which is not to say that we sort of draw sharp boundaries between these topics, but if nobody's, leading the charge on transportation, then nothing might happen on transportation.
Well, it sounds to me like, from what I'm hearing, I love this idea of a table with topics and then sort of columns about kinds of information we might want to gather. So Milton bylaws, other community bylaws, key questions we might have, maybe key resources that we might know about, maybe a table, something like that. And if we could volunteer for the next meeting, I can send out a template. And if we can volunteer to collectively fill in that table, maybe each taking a topic to sort of start with, that's not to say that this would be something that we're wed to forever, but just to get started. I think this is kind of leading us down the streamlined work plan. Not exactly, but with the idea that first we're gonna figure out these topics, then we're gonna do some research. And so I think I just want to kind of come back to that work plan and do a little reality testing with you all and see if that general idea of getting a broad outline with a goal at the beginning, to Ron's point, then doing some research and drafting and trying to kind of get our heads around the content area, and then doing some community and expert engagement. So once we sort of know what questions we want to ask, then we're going to be going out and talking to other people. We're going to be bringing people to talk to us. We're going to be planning public meetings and a survey and like pulling information in to start to fill this in. And then we're going to start to revise, refine what we have, kind of develop more of a plan, and then we'll run it by people, get more feedback, finalize. Does that generally seem like the right flow of work?
So I think outreach is the most important, and it's really hard. Not to get off topic, but even with this whole MBTA zoning, we have a public meeting once a month, and we have twice a month planning board meetings, and nobody shows up.
Yeah.
And it's huge. And, I'm lucky that I have day-to-day interaction with people like every day, and I try to say, do you know this about this? And so many people don't know anything about anything. And not that it's just, everyone is so busy, and they just think that this town's a nice town and it's gonna stay that way. And they trust that, so it's really hard for outreach. It's really hard. And I think, depending on what neighborhoods we all live in, every neighborhood, well, some neighborhoods have like really active neighborhood associations. And like my neighborhood is really active. We meet once a month. We talk about important things, even the bike and pedestrian master plan. My neighborhood has some concerns that weren't addressed in the master plan, and no one reached out to us. And that was frustrating to my whole neighborhood, because it was increasing impervious surfaces on Unquity Road in Chickataway. And nobody reached out. And like my neighborhood's pretty active. So I think it's more work probably for us, but to go into neighborhood associations and find out. And like Tim, our town planner, came via Zoom, that's why Zoom was great, came to our neighborhood association to talk about the bike plan. And that was really nice of them to do that. So sometimes smaller, more intimate, like in someone's house, or sometimes could be even beneficial.
I think there's a lot of work to do to narrow down the messaging too. I haven't seen a single climate action plan that you could, it's all more complicated than the MBTA law, right? It's like 27 more things, so. I think accepting upfront that you're never gonna get the majority of Miltonites to like really digest that. So given that, what is it really important to communicate and make sure
Mhm.
people see coming? Cause there may be things in the plan that are just about making sure that someday when they are looking to do a project, they get money for it. Oh, they're not gonna complain about that.
That's what you guys talked about at the
Yeah.
first meeting, even though my in-laws were one of the first people to put, solar panels on their house 30 years ago. It was a lot of work to find out about that information, and I'd love to do solar panels, but it's a financial thing, I can't afford to do it.
Yeah.
But I'd love to do it, and I wouldn't even know where to look to find some.
I'll show you I'll
Yeah.
show you a website there.
I'm like, oh my God, this needs to be a whole list of where.
But it's also a thing that like, probably something you would like to do when you get around to it, that
Yeah.
you're gonna have to sit down and think, I mean, it definitely is tough.
Well, so to your broader point, I think, like, you're absolutely right. Community engagement is hard and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of repetition and individual and small group outreach. And I think we're gonna really have to put on our creative thinking hats about how we do that and how we keep doing it. And just looking at the work plan, I think, so what I had here in the streamlined work plan was we start sharing information out in January of next year. And we kind of wrap that up in April. I think that's too fast, honestly. I was trying to how fast could we do this? But I think the other side of it is that part is in some ways more important than the written document at the end of it. Because when we are talking with people, that's how we're gonna actually make things happen. That's how we're gonna educate our community. That's how we're gonna get feedback to make the plan better. And that's how we're gonna get buy-in to actually implement the plan someday. So, Maggie, to your point, I just kind of feel like maybe as we think about the work plan, maybe that particular piece stretches out and maybe it's 6 months of community engagement or whatever it is. That's not wasted time. That's really important time. And it may mean that we don't get a plan quite as soon, but we get a better plan at the end. That's how I think about it. I don't know how others think about it.
I tend to agree that your point, for me, stresses the importance of getting to a shareable draft faster, because we really need to spend the bulk of the time interacting with people about it. So if we spend a year sort of thinking within this group about what should be on that piece of paper, then we're just delaying that real work.
Yeah, or maybe it's a continuous process that accompanies us throughout all the work we do. In other words, that we find ways to continually update people in the community about what we're doing, either through maybe some newsletter or a website or something, so that all the time, whether we're engaged in a formal consultation with a group or not, people that are interested in what we're doing can have an opportunity to chime in and learn about it.
I just want to say that Josh and I are currently working, I think it's hopefully going to be up tomorrow on a resiliency webpage on the Milton Town website, so.
That's great.
That's great.
That could be a starting point.
You guys have a pretty active Facebook. Well, I mean, I follow it.
Yeah,
I don't know how many followers you have, but.
yeah,
I think it's.
that's always an issue. Yeah.
I think we should have a question.
Just two points. You mentioned earlier, Tracy, the interface with, planning in the town, and maybe we should ask the planning department specifically what its priorities are in the context of our assignment and our charge. And the second one that comes to mind, is the master plan implementation committee. I believe that is going to have to be reformulated, reorganized, restructured within the next maybe 15 months or so. You can check on that. But if that's the case, how do we dovetail with the MPIC and how does it intersect with us? So that we're all going down parallel paths rather than possibly intersecting at crossroads and suffering the effects of that, as we've seen in other enterprises from time to time.
Yeah, because one of the bylaws that the planning board wants to review, is the cut and fill and tree bylaw. And it's been really hard to, implement and hold, developers accountable, but the whole goal is to minimize the disturbance of the natural topography of the land. So I know I know that's on the top of our agenda, but it's just, we haven't gotten to that yet, but I think that's, one of my laws, but I think, and that also has, trees. It's the same bylaw that covers trees and, land cut and fill.
So this is making me think, in this next stage of research and drafting, after we get an outline, which I think the table you suggested, Lisa, is gonna be a great start to our outline. And then in the next stage of research and drafting, one of the things that we're gonna need to do is to consult with people in the town to kind of learn what's going on, how do we interface with them, how do we, just make sure we're in sync with other activities. So some of that can be bringing people into our meeting to talk with us. And some of that can be us engaging with people outside the meeting, because there's probably more people than we can talk, that we want to talk with, than we have meetings to actually have those conversations. And some of it could be just reading and research and whatever, but I'm curious, so Arthur, you mentioned the planning department and the master planning implementation committee. Would you suggest those as sort of key groups to bring in and talk to us at our meetings? And are there any others? I'm sort of thinking about planning out agendas, like who should we actually have come in and talk to us, as opposed to us going out and engaging with them kind of between meetings?
Those two would make sense for me on an in-person basis.
Okay.
As
Shade
just one
Tree
voice.
Advisory Committee. I think they've done we're in the process of a tree count by
Yeah.
street.
Laura in along with Branch Lane, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I met with Alan Bishop, last week, just to, cause I heard he does cool things with data, and I like that. And that's one of the things he showed me is the data they're collecting around the town trees. And also, the tons and tons of satellite data that might be useful.
I think about, the Blue Hills Reservation and, who is managing that, right? Like it's,
Not us, it's not Milton.
right, it's
It's- yeah.
state land, right?
It's the Department of Conservation and Recreation of the
Okay.
state.
And so, how it's managed could have a big effect on the town of Milton in terms of, like fire potential, flooding potential, and things like that. And so I think that's an important stakeholder to include.
And that alone encompasses 2.7 miles, square miles of the town of Milton.
People forget that it's not Milton.
Right,
People
Right.
say, oh, well, we have so much green space, but we don't.
Right.
We
You
actually
have access
don't.
to it.
Yes. And not all of us is good, it's not all good access.
Right.
You have to, like, my big thing is I really would love to see, and that's why I was a little disappointed in the bike plan. I would love to see a bike walkway plan going up Route 28. 'Cause I think it's a shame
Yeah.
that
do something.
Yes.
So many residents have to hop in their car
Yeah,
to drive up and to access all the trails of the Blue Hills. And that's one of the deficiency in the bike plan I thought was, they didn't even address it. But yeah,
I think it's because that's a state route, so it's a different agency, so,
yeah,
uh,
yeah, but they also put Chickadam in it,
yeah.
which is the state agency.
I think the Department of Transportation does have a study which is looking at a bike path one. Cause I live off of Randolph and
Yeah.
I can't wait for a bike
Oh,
path.
I know.
Anyway,
So when we think about bringing in these groups to talk to us, the planning department, the master plan implementation committee, the shade tree advisory committee, DCR, what do we want to ask them? Like, I think one thing we could ask is, what are you doing that relates to climate change? What should we be aware of? Are there other things that would be top of mind that we would want to get from them so that we could write a better draft?
What they would have is their priorities for us to consider.
Okay,
giving them the charge that you described, so they understand the context by which that we have like our mission would probably help. And how we can, like Arthur said, like just build alignment in terms of how they're prioritized.
I think the challenge there will be that we'll probably very quickly build up an information
Yeah.
store that's got a lot of stuff in it, and it's gonna be challenging for us to know it, and then to bring in somebody external and ask them that question, like, how does your work relate to our work? They would have to digest.
I think we have to let them know what we want to discuss before we have them in.
So we kind of need that set of proposed action items so that we can say, we want to bring in this stakeholder to discuss these three, and then you have a more specific kind of manageable.
So maybe first there needs to be more of a outreach, like gather the information, phone calls, emails with these folks. And then once maybe there's a sharing of information back and forth, then have them come in to discuss.
To me, I think that's why I put that ideate term there kind of early in the initial draft of the plan. I'm not wedded to that at all, but like this notion of let's start getting some specifics to chew on earlier. I think it's important. Then it'll be clear what we need to do. The challenge will be that there'll probably be a lot, so focusing will be hard. But
Right.
In several comments that were made, comes to mind that maybe one of the other departments that we might want to meet with is the Department of Public Works, particularly with respect to precipitation issues and stormwater management, the impact of clear cutting, which none of us would espouse. Having people understand the difference and distinction between sheet water and groundwater and how they work, which I don't think is something that's very well understood. It's a major concern. Because this town is really a block of granite. So you get,
not a lot of groundwater movement.
it's, if you get the wrong variables working together, we could run into some very, very serious problems.
Yeah, I was looking at it's kind of a new property level climate risk database that's available on the internet, and I don't know how accurate it is. That go down to the property level gives information on flooding risk, fire risk, wind risk, heat risk. And high level, it saw very, very low flooding and heat risk for Milton. There are definitely specific properties that have much greater flooding risk, but by and large, most of the towns on the hill. But much higher wind and heat risks. Sort of dangerously hot days are increasing rapidly.
Yeah, because the average wind speed, like at the nursery, is 15 miles per hour. So like I come in every morning and the same plants are knocked over. It's not a real big windy day, but it's.
So the frequency of like hurricane force winds is going to be increasing. one of the expected,
Well, this will get to our adaptation.
yes.
Mhm.
I tell you what, we're almost at 7 o'clock and I want to keep us moving just because we could talk forever about this, but there's some other topics. So what I'm going to propose is that before the next meeting, I will revise the work plan in light of the comments here. And I'm also going to put together a table of the sort you were suggesting, Lisa, with topics and columns about resources, bylaws, other community bylaws. We don't need to fill that in, but I'd love for folks to take a look at it before our next meeting.
Mhm.
And if you want to start filling it in, by all means, put in whatever comes to mind. Otherwise, I think at our next meeting, we'll go ahead and try to take a topic and say, okay, before the next meeting, before October, we'll try to fill that in a little bit. Does that sound okay to folks? Yeah.
So I mean, I think this is the stage where sort of settling on what are those topic areas is, I don't think that's gonna be terribly difficult, and we just listed off the main part of the list, but I think this is the time if they're gonna add something, that we do that, so that's what discuss outline proposed revisions at the September meeting was about. It's like, if we think there needs to be a new sort of broad area that we've forgotten about in this meeting,
Yeah.
add it there.
One thing I'm not seeing, which I know is in the charge, is environmental justice.
Mhm.
And I think that might be a
Mhm.
piece. That's not its own topic,
It kind of cuts through everything.
but I'm seeing it as one of the columns,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
good
building,
point.
what's the environmental justice piece, transportation?
That's a great,
Mhm.
great suggestion. Um, Any other suggestions for columns, sort of considerations that we should have early on going in? I mean, there'll be lots of things that we're gonna wanna think about as we work on drafting this, like funding, implementation steps, data, lots of things. But in terms of starting out, is there anything that you think we ought to be thinking about across all the categories?
And there's bylaws, there's sort of municipal project level stuff, procuring electric buses. There's enablement, because I think so much of this is about private actions that
Mhm.
town of Milton can only facilitate or influence, can't make it happen. So
So we might want to think about, like, I'm imagining a big table with a lot of columns. And a few of the columns are going to be the things that we want to start on. And then we're going to list the other columns and work on them over time. Just because we could quickly overwhelm ourselves.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking just in real time about how I might structure this. Does that sound okay to folks? Like, we'll put the many columns, but not try to do it all for the next meeting. So, and then we can revise it in the next meeting.
One thing that's nice about it being a shared document, I mean, let's say I'm looking up, food and waste, but I happen to come across something about buildings in my
Right.
research, I'll put it in there.
Yeah,
and
I think that's great.
Everyone can decide yay or nay on it.
Absolutely, yeah, there's no reason to silo ourselves, like if you come up with a great question or resource or something about some other topic, I think that's great.
Not to tangent, but do we have a grant writer in the town at all? Anyone?
I think
Okay.
there is in the departments, the planning
Yeah.
board,
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
the planning department, the staff are,
Okay,
they write the
they're at the
grant
grant.
applications.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, just curious.
my position and Josh's position, do some as well.
They do as well. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, not a specific,
No, fair. Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
But I think staff is very proactive, I think even Chase.
yeah, we
It's
definitely
very
look
good,
at,
yeah.
as many as we can and try to do as many as we can.
where did you hear about them?
A lot of different areas, CZM, which is the Coastal Zonal Management, Department of Transportation,
Right.
a lot of, state organizations, and NEPRA, I mentioned them before, I think, with what you were talking about, stormwater, I think they're a good resource, especially regionally, because they work with a lot of towns around here. But yeah, anyone that can help, really.
Yeah, no,
Well, that's actually a perfect transition into our next topic, which is how to gather information on town planning and budgeting, because
Mhm.
we may need help as a committee. We're certainly gonna need help and resources as a town to do any of these things. And I just will confess right now, I know nothing about the town planning and budgeting schedule,
Yeah.
so, I don't know if folks here, Arthur, others have, sort of grounding comments about how to think about this, like as we line up our work. So you were mentioning earlier, Alex, like when the proposals are due. I'm curious to learn about that because we may not be ready right now to make any proposals, but if there's a deadline that we know we need to, if we're gonna propose something for this year, it needs to be by X date, maybe we can get ourselves organized for that. So,
I think it's December.
December, okay.
Yeah, isn't it a legal requirement that you don't always follow? That, that would give the warrant committee the budgets by December.
But that's a more finalized budget.
Yeah, and then it goes, yeah, so it's a proposal essentially, and then it goes to the warrant committee, and they discuss it and hash it out. And everything.
So I bumped into, Mr. Milano upstairs before the meeting when I was sitting in the wrong room, and he said, they're gonna want so initial requests coming in October. That's all right.
Yeah, because last year the warrant committee didn't get things until very, very late.
So-
Granted, Nick was new, so he didn't start. until-
Is there like a format that we have to follow? Like, is there?
So I've never written about it.
Okay,
so I don't-
just curious, just curious, yeah, yeah,
That's all that I know.
yeah, no, no, no more than I,
We know for sure there's gonna be the early annual town meeting in May.
okay, okay,
That's a given,
okay,
and there'll be at least one special town meeting beforehand, I think, December,
December 4th.
okay,
and then one can pop up in February,
okay.
depending upon what the needs are. But I think to get to Maggie's point, if we're gonna have financial submissions, we certainly would need to have those no later than calendar for the May town meeting. And if we wanna have a budget for the committee before that, to get work done between, let's say, the first of the year, which is not that far away,
Right,
in May, we probably need to have something to submit for the December town meeting.
But maybe there's like some internship opportunities for kids.
right,
Yeah. We can reach out, I don't know how to go.
Sustainable Milton is sending some folks to a Curry College job fair. I think in September. I haven't been involved in that, so I don't know if they have like really specific plans for anybody that they might entice, but
So I know my son goes to Mount Maritime, and so one of their majors is alternative energy, and on campus, they have a big,
when,
windmill.
Yeah.
And so, and he's a marine engineer major, so he has to do his junior year on a ship for, a corporation. And, but so maybe there is a student who's in the alternative energy program who needs to do their junior year somewhere.
So the superior engineering programs, MIT, VU, Tufts
Wentworth,
University,
what were they?
Wentworth, right? Multiple ones.
Yeah, we have a co-op program, the engineering department with Northeastern.
That's awesome.
So what kinds of help do we think we might want as a committee? Like, we're talking engineering, do we think we want that kind of help? Do we think we want help, researching these different topics? Do we think we want help, planning public meetings or engagement events, social media? Like there's all kinds of things we might want help with, maybe all of the above, but I'm just kind of curious to figure out the right resources and the right timing. It'd probably be good to figure out what we think that as a committee is gonna be more than we can handle, and we need some extra hands and extra expertise perhaps.
definitely my strong intuition is that the public outreach piece is the hardest and certainly the most distinct from my skill set. maybe one of you is a secret social media expert. But we've definitely been trying to do that at Sustainable Milton, and I've sort of run up against my limitations there, so. I'd love to have some help making that successful, because I agree that really is the substance of it.
Do we have like a town app at all? Do you ever think about that? Like,
The website.
do we have an app that like you could send notifications, or am I thinking like too far?
No, so you can sign up for notifications. And you have Twitter, isn't it linked to
Yeah, we
Twitter?
have Twitter, yeah.
So it's, you have
Um,
Facebook, Twitter.
I think you can subscribe to different committees, right? You
Yes,
get
I
notifications.
subscribe to all of them. You know, but it's just,
The one app that I know about is the waste services.
Yeah.
Like Recollect, I don't know if you guys have that,
Yeah.
it just tells you the
I'm just
schedule,
curious other dimensions.
updates on
for each
waste
people.
collection.
Yeah,
Other than that, I'm not sure of any
Yeah.
apps.
Yeah, I'd say my experience with the town's digital offerings, over the course of 18 months of being interested and kind of looking for stuff, I've ultimately found a lot of information on the town website, but it was hard. And then when I tried to direct friends who are a little less committed
right.
to the town website, they'll come back and say, that's terrible, I couldn't find anything.
well, they just have a new website,
I know.
so hopefully it's easier.
Right.
I think the problem is, the search returns a lot of old stale stuff, and that's still there. There's a lot of ancient information that's not relevant anymore. And just takes a lot of work to fix that.
I was gonna add, I've attended a few of the public meetings for the Superfund site on the Neponset, and, it's part of the Superfund law that there's public outreach, and there's a, like, community coordinator. So that could be an interesting model to look at, of what they do, and of course, it's the federal government, so they have, I think they hire a consulting firm that does the outreach and all of that, but, again, it could be a good model.
And even the high school, they have to do, volunteer hours,
Mm-hmm.
Those kids are all over Facebook.
Totally.
You know,
Yeah.
TikTok. Not that you wanna be on TikTok, but.
Well, I'm gonna suggest that we all think about this some more before our next meeting. Because I want to move on to the next topic, but, so if initial requests are due in October, that means by our next meeting, we really need to have some specific ideas. And I think what we'd be focused on right now is proposals to help the committee, as opposed to, like, I don't think we know enough yet to say a proposal to carry out the work of the plan, we don't know yet. But in terms of proposals to help the committee, I would suggest folks think about that, and we'll put it on the agenda for next time. And, if you want to propose an internship to do social media to help us engage with the public, that would be one idea. If we want to do an internship for some dedicated engineering research on some of these more complicated topics, or any other kind of research, that would be another idea. If we want to get funding to get a consultant to help us do this stuff, that would be another idea. So think about what you think would be most appropriate, and let's talk about it at the next meeting.
Can I add just a quick idea? So my, one of my kids is a senior at UMass Amherst, and he is in a consulting club. And they consult for like major corporations and different things. And there are a bunch of people in the club who are interested in renewable energy and environmental issues. And so whether it's, UMass, a lot of the schools have that. And it's, free. It's great if you can make a donation at some point to them. But that could be really, you have a team of students, and they're really into building their own skills.
Mhm.
Excellent, good idea. All right,
So I guess if initial requests are due in mid-October-ish, that feels like the kind of thing we want to vote to make a request for funding. And we need to be in a position to do that by the October meeting.
So do you want to put a list on a shared drive, and we get kind of put ideas together so that we can vote, take an action for
So I
October?
guess, yeah, our homework for the next meeting is to come up with any proposals of things we might need to request funding for. And maybe we could vote on it next meeting if it's like straightforward, or maybe the meeting after that, but that's about how much time we seem to have.
Do we have a sense when we submit those initial requests, and this goes back to the question of format, like how much detail do we have to have? Is this a paragraph with a dollar amount? Or is this like a super detailed funding proposal? Like, I just don't know what that looks like. Does anybody have any idea?
The town administrator's office will help with that.
Okay,
And you just have to, unfortunately, you have to present to the warrant committee. And so it's, you have 15 people who have all different questions, so it's kind of hard to know what their questions would be. But basically, probably, what are you gonna use it for? And what are we gonna get out of it? You know, what's the benefit? So I think MPEC only has, their budget, I think, is 30,000 a year. So there's not a lot of funds
mm-hmm.
to be had. So I think we have to be very careful as to what we ask for and how much.
And there's always grant funding.
Mhm.
What's the inventory work funded by the grant?
Yeah, I believe so.
So that's a totally separate
Yeah.
channel and timeline. Yes.
All right, well, so Alex, how about you and I reach out to the town administrator's office, figure out the format, send that out to this group before the next meeting. And then ideally, if folks have suggestions, you could put it in that format and bring it to the next meeting so we can discuss it and ideally vote on it. And we can also reach out to someone on the warrant committee and ask, kind of get a little bit of a heads up about what we would need to answer, just so we can start doing that homework. Does that sound all right?
Mhm.
Okay, so moving on,
Just
oh yeah,
to back up.
Yeah.
Anything that goes to the warrant committee comes from the select board.
okay, so we have to
Because
go
if
through
the
this.
warrant is the select board's document, the warrant committee conducts it, so there's a review process and recommendations to town meeting.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Is that above a threshold? Like, is there a threshold below which the town administrator manages things internally? Or-
Like a dollar amount.
Yeah,
Usually 10,000, if I remember correctly, it's less than 10,000, 9,999 used to be the figure at one point in time. They have administrative discretion, that's what you're asking for.
right, so anything
Versus
over
having to
10,000 is gonna go through the full select.
Well,
board.
sometimes it has to go, it depends, sometimes you can do it, but you have to use a bid process
Yeah,
Right,
for everything, you use the bid process, you do three,
over a certain amount.
right, okay,
Well, let's follow up and ask the town administrator about that,
Okay.
and I'm imagining we might be less than that amount, but,
And Amy will be very, very helpful, Nick will probably have to tie in with Amy.
great. Okay, I want to turn to the next topic because, there are some great resources that have been identified already. So this, as I mentioned before, this will be kind of a time in our agenda to sort of share resources that we found with each other. And Arthur, you shared with us, since the last meeting, some information around the Ponset River. So I think I have that right. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
The Conservation Commission has submitted a proposal for funding with respect to 25 acres of land, and it goes back to part of what Maggie was talking about earlier, that need to be preserved. And Milton was part of a DCR, formerly MDC project, out of which has come Pope John Paul II Park, Quincy Hess Park. Milton was a partner in that process, but not much was developed in Milton as a result of that. So there's an opportunity for much to be done in that general area, and one of the elements in there in the proposal to the Community Preservation Committee was that 25 acres serves as an important laboratory for monitoring and mitigating the impacts of climate change. I met with the executive director of the Neponset Watershed Association, Ian Cook, and discussed it with him, and during that conversation, he supported this notion and also indicated that they had the estuary as a priority in their work, along with other aspects of the waterways in the town of Milton. And there's a myriad of topics that relate to this. It's not just volume of water and what the impact that's going to be on flora and fauna, but also in terms of volume, but also the degree of salinity, the possible changes in the temperature of the water. We have one of the largest smelt fish hatcheries in New England, if not the largest, in the Neponset River, just below the Baker Dam. And what might the impact of this be on that? We have interconnectivity, because you mentioned the EPA project,
Right.
3.7 miles from Baker Dam up to Mother Brook. Mother Brook is not part of the Neponset watershed. Our river watershed is part of the Charles River watershed. So if they're going to have impact, there's going to be impact in Milton that's going to come from the backside as well as from the front side. So we have so far been approved by the CPC to move forward with a proposal that's due on the 29th. Ian Cook indicated that in that conversation that if this committee wished, he would be willing to come in and speak with us about what the Neponset River watershed thoughts are, goals are, and objectives are in terms of climate action related initiatives.
So perhaps we could add him as, along with some of the other groups that we talked about, as people we might bring in to talk with us, and
He and his staff are very erudite and practical.
yeah,
They've appeared before the Conservation Commission on a number of occasions. They're excellent to work with. Highly collaborative.
I've actually been sampling at the dam there for 5 years for them.
Oh, you did?
That's
Okay,
cool.
so
That's
you
my
know.
spot.
I would add to that too, the Apex, the company that was doing the greenhouse gas inventory, is also to have a representative come and break down that report.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So I don't know when you guys want to do that, but they're ready.
Okay.
that's great.
I think that should be a priority, because that
Yeah.
really is the baseline we were discussing for future progress, and understanding what the biggest sources of emissions are, I think can help us prioritize our attention on the mitigation side of it.
Yeah, so they would have a representative ready for next meeting if that would be okay, or the following one as well.
Before we decide on that, I just wanted to go back to you, Arthur, for a second. Is there anything that that the Conservation Commission needs from this committee in terms of your proposal?
Concom has of course endorsed it. The CPC does like to have endorsements from many other boards or committees in the town if they so wish to align themselves with it. Did everybody get a copy of all the documents? So that if that's something that the committee wishes to do, that would be an important part of the supporting materials that would go to the Community Preservation Committee for their deadline date of September 29th.
Would
So it
that
might
be like
something you
a
could-
letter from the
Right.
co-chairs of the committee? Okay.
So we ran into this, last year at the planning board, that the only, things is like a few different groups came before the planning board looking for support, and not all the groups came, so we were a little bit afraid that if we supported one just because they came and the other ones didn't come, we don't want people, the CPC, to think we didn't support the other. So that's the only, like, we struggled with
Yeah.
that, and how could you not support them all? You know, so, I don't know, that's, like, I was a little bit uncomfortable with that, because I think maybe the Beverly Park one didn't come to the planning board, but we kind of liked Beverly Park, and, so I don't know, we just felt a little uncomfortable supporting some and not others. So that's the
Yeah,
only.
it's definitely, it's much easier to read something and say, this sounds like a nice thing, than to actually know enough to say, relative to all the other nice things that, and which we can't do all of, like, should we do this one?
Yeah,
Uh,
even like the Milton Farmers Market area,
But I
there's
think
some
you can,
great trees, and I was afraid that those are all gonna come down. Grass is gonna go away, so it's that was a great thing to support, but there's cautionary support too.
In this instance, there's a direct tie-in because this proposal relates specifically in its wording to the climate issues and change.
and you can word support in the sense of like, we endorse this as a not bad thing, that is consistent with our goal,
Sure.
not that we will say it's, you know, fits right here in our priorities that we haven't established yet.
So if we wrote a letter that said, we support this, we think it's consistent with what this committee is trying to do. And we are not aware of other proposals, so we're not speaking to the value of any other proposal, we're just speaking to the value of this one, being that it's positive. Would folks feel comfortable with that kind of letter of support?
Yep.
Is there a motion to suggest that Alex and I write such a letter and send it on behalf of the committee to, sorry, which group would it be?
The Community Preservation Committee.
Okay,
So the very specific proposal is to fund researching, surveying, and identifying and delineating parcels in the Milton portion of the estuary.
Yeah, there are three objectives.
It's a survey.
The surveying it, resurveying it, and one of that aspects is to protect against encroachment. We have a lot of that in conservation and open space areas in the town. It's one of the reasons why we have a signage program underway from the Conservation Commission. The determination of the wetland, upland boundaries. So you know where you can work in, what type of work you can do on an upland basis, and then what activities can be relegated to the wetlands. And then the third one, let's see, and then planning. Third element was planning.
But is that part of the? Is that
That's
to
part of,
support future
that's part
planning or
of the
planning is
CPC.
part of the
That's-
scope?
That's for CPC, but for us, I think the notion of an important laboratory for monitoring and mitigating the impact of climate change would be probably what you'd want to have as a pull
so is there a motion to have Alex and I write a letter? And
out. Yeah, the three priorities would be surveying wetlands, doing wetlands delineations and establishing a signage program.
They make a motion. So move.
great. Is there a second?
Consider.
All in favor? Okay, so we will write a letter along those
Thank you.
lines,
Mhm.
and thank you for bringing it to us, Arthur, I think that's great.
And maybe at some point, we would want to, put something into CPC,
Mhm.
maybe with this different.
That's a great thought.
But, I don't know what it would be at this point.
Yeah, we should think about that. Are there any other, just announcements of meetings, events of interest, resources that folks wanted to share? Yeah,
We were talking about forest canopy, and there's a website, it's mrlc.gov. And they have all kinds of data sets on there, and they also have some tools where you can visualize the data and compare think going back to like 2001, 2019 by county. Now you might be able to download the data and get it, you know, at a town level, which would be cool.
MRLC.gov.
Mhm. And if you Google like tree canopy data, you'll also find other resources. But some of them are more like national forest or state forest level, not a heavy tree in front of my yard, providing shade.
Thank you. Any other resources folks wanted to share? Okay, well then we'll move on and see if there's any public comments. Can't tell if there's anyone from the public on the screen. Don't think so.
There's a couple possibly.
Not hearing any public comments.
I
Then,
think they're just saying that we're doing a great job. That's what I think they say.
well, I will say that, in the Sustainable Milton newsletter, Alex put out a little blurb in that newsletter encouraging people to come and participate as, you know, listen to our meetings, provide public comments. So hopefully, some folks will do that. And if you're talking with people, you know, in the neighborhood, friends, family, whatever, I think we all want this to be an open process and want to hear from people. So, you know, welcome and encouraged.
Especially one thought, I mean,
Yeah.
when we have other people coming in, maybe from the master plan, et cetera, how do we want to structure our meetings?
Mm.
And nobody wants to have all night meetings, we have enough of those in other
Yeah.
quarters of our lives. So probably may need a little extra time to accommodate the external party, the Q and A period that might be related to it. And then the conduct of our regular work, just to put that on the table.
Do speakers need to be part of our meeting? I mean, I know maybe we don't want to have another night when there's a meeting, but is it a possibility?
I don't know.
Yeah. Depends upon people's calendars and what
Yeah.
they can accommodate.
And maybe there could be a time where our group meets with another group to, you know, for efficiency of time. Cause I must say, I'm like out of my realm with, building. I mean, my husband's a contractor, so I hear certain things, but I don't always like sink it in, so, you know.
Or
and-
maybe we could arrange those as webinars, where we invite them to speak to us, but then that would kind of limit how much, back and forth we could do within the open meeting law, but if really the goal is just to hear them.
And that's a good point, giving people who are going to be coming in to work with us the option of being physically present or coming into.
But if you make it something like a webinar, then it could just be, open to the public, but not have to be a formal committee meeting.
Although if we wanted to ask questions of somebody,
Yeah,
then we
right.
couldn't really do it.
You're gonna run into issues with that one.
Okay, well, let's think about that a little bit more. It's a good point, and I know folks have schedule constraints, and when we initially talked about when we were gonna meet, we were saying we would go until 7:30. So we may not have a lot of flexibility within the given time slot. But, you know, maybe we'll figure out exactly who we want to invite and then, you know, schedule it depending on the particular person when they're available and on that
I
particular
think
day.
I was the one that had a
Yeah,
conflict that starts at 7:30, but just losing me doesn't destroy the quorum, so.
yeah, but it, you know, everybody's got a lot of things, so we
Yeah,
want to be mindful of not taking up too much time. So with that, I think we are finished with our meeting. I have to.
Motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn. All right, all in favor? Wonderful. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank